Okay, so we're back on live stream. There have been folks watching this today. I don't know if that's your witnesses. You might want to get in touch with your witnesses. I don't know when we went off live stream, so I don't know how much of a gap there is. I didn't notice it before the break. It has to have a new title, or else it overwrites what we've done before. So there's a new title, but your witnesses should be able to get back in now. So Mr. Trout, as what exhibit?
I believe it was Company 35, Your Honor.
Okay, and you can continue. Oh, we can go back on the record.
Thank you. Mr. Valdez, do you have a second document in front of you consisting of 7 pages, no exhibits, entitled The Supplemental Direct Testimony of Raymond E. Valdez? Okay. Can we approach?
Yes.
Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I apologize, Your Honor. Could we mark the supplemental direct as 36, Company 36?
Company 36 is marked.
Finally, Mr. Valdez, do you have in front of you a third document of 10 pages, again, no exhibits, that's entitled The Rebuttal Testimony of Raymond E. Valdez?
Yes.
Could we mark that as 37, Your Honor?
37 is marked.
Okay. Mr. Valdez, were all 3 of these documents prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
Yes.
Do you have any additions, corrections, or deletions to any of these documents?
No.
Are the contents of these documents true and accurate to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes.
If I were to ask you, sitting here this afternoon, the same questions that are posed in those documents, would you give the same answers today as you give in those documents?
Yes.
Do you adopt these 3 exhibits, Company 35, 36, and 37, as your sworn testimony in this proceeding?
Yes.
Your Honor, I offer Companies 35, 36, and 37 into evidence.
Any objection? Hearing none, 35 through 37 are admitted.
The witness is available for cross-examination.
Office of People's Counsel.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Valdez.
Good evening.
I'm Scott Strauss. I'm going to ask you a few questions today on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. I'm going to focus on your direct testimony, Exhibit 35. If you could turn to page 27 of that exhibit. I'm focusing on your sentence on lines 15 to 17. If you could take a moment and have a look at that.
I'm sorry, what page number, please?
27.
Okay.
27 of 32, lines 15 through 17.
Yes.
You see you refer there to Ohio HB6 activities. Do you see that?
Yes.
And as you use the term there on your testimony, does that include the payment by First Energy of roughly $60 million to an organization called Generation Now?
I'm not familiar with the details of that type of payment.
Have you heard the term Generation Now?
I have.
And what do you understand it to mean?
I don't know what it means. It was a vendor name that I was provided.
Do you understand have you ever heard that it was a 501c4 organization purportedly controlled by the former Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives, Larry Householder? Have you ever heard that or read that anywhere?
I have not.
You have not. Have you read anywhere that First Energy paid millions of dollars to fund Generation Now in exchange for efforts by Mr. Householder to secure the passage of a $1.3 billion bailout bill that would benefit 2 nuclear plants that were then owned by First Energy? Do you recall reading that anywhere?
Objection to the extent it assumes facts, not in evidence.
Overruled.
No, I have no knowledge of that.
I have no knowledge of that. You aware of a bill in the Ohio legislature called House Bill 6. Are you aware of that?
I know the term.
Was that what you mean by HB 6 as you use that term on line 15 at page 27 of Exhibit 35? Is that to what you're referring?
That term I actually took from a different case number 9667.
Right, but I guess I'm just asking you, when you say HB 6 there on line 15, what did you mean?
The information provided in case number 9667. That's where I lifted that term.
Okay, so that term refers in general to information produced in case 9667. That's what you mean when you use it there in your testimony. Do I have it right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, starting on line 15, you state that certain of these HB 6 costs may have been improperly classified, misallocated, or lacked proper supporting documentation. Do I read that right in your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to the HB 6 costs that were identified in 9667 that were improperly classified, what's your understanding as to how they should have been classified?
That's not my terminology. That's the terminology that I took from case number 9667.
The first time you heard the term improperly classified with respect to HB 6 costs was in case number 9667. Do I have that right?
It may have actually been in a SEC reporting. There was a company public reporting in an SEC report, from what I recall. That may have been the first time I've heard that.
And if I asked you about misallocated costs or costs that were lacking proper documentation, 9667 costs, would your answers be the same?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Sure. With respect to costs that were misallocated or lacked supporting documentation, the 9667 costs, would your answer be the same, that the first time you heard of it was in the case 9667?
Well, the first time I've heard those terms, I lifted that text from case 9667. The first time I may have heard that, though, is in the SEC public reporting.
Reporting by First Energy, is that correct?
Correct.
And going down further on page 27, you say, this is at line 17, my department received information coordinated through the controller's department. Do you see that?
I do.
And by your department, you mean Rates and Regulatory Affairs? Is that what you mean?
Yes, Rates and Regulatory Affairs for West Virginia and Maryland.
For West Virginia. What do you mean when you say the receipt of the information was coordinated through the controller's department? What does that mean?
That the information that was provided to me came from the controller's department.
So when you say, to that end, my department received information coordinated through the controller's department, I could read that to say my department received information from the controller's department. They mean the same thing. Is that right?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. I'd like to show you a document. It is a data response that you provided in this proceeding. It's actually sponsored by you and Ms. Ashton. It is the response to OPC 1.01 in 9695, and I would ask that it be marked as Exhibit OPC 20.
OPC 20 is marked.
If you could take a moment to review the question and your responses to it.
Thank you.
Okay.
You've had a look. Do you stand by this response today?
Their only part of this response was drafted by myself.
Do you stand by the parts that refer to you?
As I look in Part B, yes.
Okay, fine. I'll ask you a question, and you can
Okay.
tell me whether you stand by it. I think that might be easier. Looking at Part B, Subpart B, there is a statement in the second paragraph. Potomac Edison does not know the identity of the individual who first identified that the costs were improperly classified, misallocated, or lacked proper supporting documentation. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
It says that information is not within Potomac Edison's possession, custody, or control. Do you see that?
I do.
You, sir, are a First Energy Service Company employee. Did I hear you correctly at the beginning of your testimony?
Yeah, I am that's a good question. I am a First Energy Service Company employee that does work solely for two operating companies, utilities. One is Monongahela Power, otherwise known as Mon Power, and the second one is Potomac Edison. So my work is dedicated solely to Mon Power and Potomac Edison.
But as a let me ask you, as a First Energy Service Company employee, do you know who first identified the costs that were improperly classified, misallocated, or lacked proper documentation?
I do not.
You do not. And then if I look at the next paragraph of that response, you state that you, Mr. Valdez, have not independently determined which vendor charges were improperly classified, misallocated, or lacking in documentation. Do you see that?
I do.
Would it be fair to say then that you were told which HB6 activity charges had been improperly classified, misallocated, or lacking in documentation, and your job was to review the Potomac Edison test year costs to see if there were any that fell within those categories? Would that be correct?
As a generalization, I think that's a fair generalization.
Okay. Is that typical that you and your staff might rely on other people in the company for determinations of how costs should be classified or allocated?
Yeah, as a rates department, our function is exactly what it says. It is to take the information that's booked by the company and then convert it into a revenue requirement and rates, and also to administer provisions with regard to the tariff. Our functions are not with regard to classifications or allocations.
So then I think the answer to my question would be yes, that you rely on others in the company to make determinations about how costs should be classified or allocated. Would I be right about that?
Yes.
Okay. And when you rely on others to make those determinations, do you typically know the identity of the person who made the determination?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that
Yeah.
question, please?
When you rely on others for determinations of how costs should be classified or allocated, would it be typical for you to know the identity of the person or the department that made that determination?
Not necessarily, because it's not germane to my job responsibilities.
Okay. Let me ask you just to make sure, back on page 27 of Exhibit 35, line 17 and 18, when you talk about information coordinated through the Controller's Department, do you understand that to be a case where the Controller's Department received data from someone and then sent that data on to you?
The basis of that statement is not the path that you laid forward. It was that I was provided information and I did resulting calculations.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I understand, and I ask you if it's correct, that you received information concerning improperly classified or misallocated or undocumented HB6 costs from Eileen Mickelson, who was at that time First Energy's Vice President for Rates and Regulatory Affairs. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you restate that, please?
Sure. I understand that you received information concerning these improperly classified or misallocated HB6 costs from Ms. Eileen Mickelson, who at that time was First Energy's then Vice President of Rates and Regulatory Affairs. Is that a correct statement?
No, that's not correct. She directed me to do the calculations.
She directed you to do the calculations, but she didn't provide you the classifications.
She did not.
Who did?
Provide classifications?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, how'd you get them?
I got the vendor cost from the controller department.
So when you say you got the vendor cost, what does that mean? What is the vendor cost as opposed to what was improperly classified or misallocated? I'm not sure I'm understanding you, so maybe you could tell me.
Well, in order to do the calculations I need to do, there are some fundamental items I need to know. One is what company was charged. So I received the affected company. I also need to know the dollar amount. I would also need to know when those dollar amounts occurred, what particular months, in fact. I would also need to know whether it's O&M, which is operation and maintenance, as well as its capital, and also the accounts or accounts that are charged. And once I have that basic information, that accounting basis, then I can perform the calculations necessary.
You would have to know the vendor name as well, is that correct?
Incorrect.
That's incorrect. You can do this without knowing the vendor name.
The vendor name would not change the calculations and is not dependent upon the calculations.
How do you know what cost to search for if you don't know the vendor name?
I don't search for costs.
What do you search for?
I don't do the search. The vendor information was provided to me.
When you say the vendor information, what was the vendor information? Give me an example of the vendor information that you received.
It was the same items that I mentioned before: the company, the cost, when it occurred, those particular months, whether it's O&M, whether it's capital, as well as the particular accounting, such as the 3-digit FERC account associated with it.
When you say the company, you mean the vendor company?
No,
Which company we're talking about?
Potomac Edison.
Potomac Edison. I believe you said you performed this analysis at the direction of Ms. Mickelson. Is that correct?
Yes, she directed that I would be receiving information from the accounting controllers department, and that I should do a calculation to determine what, if any, amounts were reflected in customer rates.
Okay. Did she tell you whether anybody had directed her to tell you to do that?
She did not tell me that.
Did she tell you why you needed to do that?
I don't recall the specifics of the conversation, but it's actually not uncommon for me to get requests from any number of people that ask for amounts that are included in rates. For example, I will get questions how much uncollectibles dollars are built into rates. I'll get questions how much depreciation expense for transformers is built into rates. And so that type of question, it's not necessary. It doesn't occur all the time, but it's neither uncommon either.
Am I correct that the analysis you performed was shared with Ms. Mickelson and also with a Raymond Reinhardt? You know that name?
Yes, I do.
Is Mr. Reinhardt an employee of First Energy?
Yes, he is. He's also in the rates department.
Am I correct that you shared the analysis with those two people, Ms. Mickelson and Mr. Reinhardt?
That's correct.
Were there any other folks at the company you shared it with?
There would have been communication involved, that those were the two primary recipients, but there were other recipients on the communication.
Like who? Who else would have gotten your analysis?
I know that legal was involved. I can't recall other folks that were involved, though.
The information you received to do the analysis, the vendor and the cost and so on, how was that provided to you?
Email
An email from who?
from accounting.
From accounting. Mr. Richards or anyone particular in accounting?
It was, I do believe it was Mr. Art Richards, who's a director in accounting.
And why would Mr. Reinhardt have been involved? What was his role in all of this?
He was consolidating information for Ms. Mickelson, from my understanding.
He reported to Ms. Mickelson at the time? Is that correct?
I don't believe he directly reported to her. There may have been an intermediary between his reporting relationship.
To whom do you directly report at that time?
At that time was Ms. Mickelson.
And Ms. Mickelson, just for the record, was terminated as a result of events concerning the HB6 activities. Do you have that understanding?
I don't know the reasons for her termination.
Fair enough. Let's show you another document. We go off the record for a moment.
We can go off the record.
That's the one. While we're handing that out, let me ask you a different question, Mr. Valdez. The analysis that you did, when you gave it to Ms. Mickelson and Mr. Reinhardt, did you get any feedback on it? Were you asked to modify it or reconsider it in some fashion? Were there any revisions to it?
It was never revised.
Did you receive any information from Ms. Mickelson or Mr. Reinhardt? Oh, this is what we needed. Thank you very much. Something along those lines.
Not to my recollection.
You handed it in and then never heard anything further about it. Would that be right?
I don't recall any communications after I submitted it.
Okay. I'll ask you to take a look at a document. It is a data response that was provided in case number 9667. It's the response to OPC data request 3.8, and I'd ask that it be marked as OPC Cross Exhibit 21.
OPC 21 is marked.
Take a moment to have a look at it, sir.
I'm familiar with it.
And you see that you were the sponsor of this response, correct? You see that?
I'm the sponsor and author.
You are the sponsor and author, thank you. And so the attachment is a spreadsheet, correct?
Yes, it's a spreadsheet I created.
Okay. And you see that spreadsheet has rows and columns. It totals at the top. It has 3 entries for vendors A-D, sustainability, generation now, and HWO, and it totals to $37,588.39. You see that?
I do.
Okay, can you tell me to whom does vendors A and D refer? Who are vendors A and D?
That section, there were 4 vendors, and rather than listing 4 vendors, they were just generically called vendors A through D. In the documentation in the interrogatories, it identified who the 4 vendors were, but I can't recall who the 4 vendors were that comprised vendors A through D. It was provided, though, in discovery.
Discovery in 9667, you mean?
And this case as well.
Oh. Do you recall hearing the name Tony George? Is that a name you're familiar with?
I do. I've heard that name.
Could that have been one of the vendors in vendors A through D?
I don't recall.
Do you recall the name Sam Randazzo? Is that a name you've heard?
I recall that name.
Was he one of the vendors in A through D?
I don't recall seeing that name.
And to what does sustainability refer?
There was a vendor named Sustainability Fund Alliance, from what I can remember.
Was it the Sustainable Funding Alliance of Ohio? Would that be right?
I don't know.
The most you remember is sustainable funding. Is that correct?
The most I actually remember is sustainability, and the remaining part is from a faint recollection.
Do you recall reading or seeing anywhere that the Sustainable Funding Alliance of Ohio was an organization to which First Energy made payments that went to the former head of the PUCO in return for his help concerning a bailout of First Energy nuclear plants? Do you recall reading anything like that?
I've never read anything like that.
Do you recall asking Ms. Mickelson or Mr. Reinhardt or anybody in the controllers or the accounting departments what sustainability meant?
No, none of these vendors had any, none of them meant anything to me.
They meant nothing to you. Okay. How about Generation Now? That mean nothing? Do you know what that is? What's
Correct.
that a reference to?
Yeah, I still don't know what that really means.
How about HWO? Have you heard the term hardworking Ohioans? Is that a name you're familiar with?
That's what HWO stands for. I don't know what that is.
How do you know that? How do you
That
know
was part of the vendor name because whenever I prepared this sheet, it wouldn't fit in the cell, so I had to abbreviate to HWO.
I see. I see. Down at the bottom of page 28 of Exhibit 35, that's your direct testimony.
Page 28, is that correct?
I'm looking at the answer that begins on line 13 and goes over to page 29. Did you have a look at that? I wanted to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
Good. I had a question. At line 17, you're talking there about an additional review that didn't involve HB6. Am I right about that?
Correct.
Okay. And on line 17, you say the Controller's Department identified the costs allocated to PE. Do you see that?
I do.
Just to be clear, on the page before, at line 18, when you're talking about the 966 refunds, you say information coordinated through the Controller's Department. Are you drawing a distinction there, or is it just wordsmithing? It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
It is. Okay.
It's the same thing in the sense that I was provided cost by the Controller's Department.
And then you then did a calculation. This is on page 28. You did a calculation based on that information from the Controller's Department, and you came up with $195,939 of sponsorship/advertising. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then there was an additional set of miscellaneous costs that totaled $68,000. Is that correct?
Yes, $68,421.
I'm sorry, $68,421. Thank you. If you could turn to to Exhibit RV3 to your testimony. I'm looking at page 1 of 3.
RV3, correct? Okay.
Right.
Okay, I'm there.
And on page 1, you show the 68,421. Do you see that?
I do.
And then you have an asterisk that explains what miscellaneous means, and it's FE Foundation, lobbying, FE products, IT for FE products, vendors, and trade association dues. Do you see that?
I do.
And that listing of costs was prepared by Craig Energy and Financial Services. Do you know that?
I don't know who prepared the, well, I don't know if Craig prepared it. I know I was provided it by the Controller's Department.
I see. So you provided that list of cost categories, and you were not aware who came up with the list. You were just provided the list. Do I have it right?
I was provided the list of costs.
And who provided that to you, sir?
Primarily probably through the Controller's Department from my recollection.
The record for a moment, Your Honor.
Yes. While you do that, I'm going to stand up for a moment.
Very well.
I think it doesn't close, sorry.
I'm ready when you are, Mr. Strauss.
Yes, Your Honor. I have another document to show the witness. It is a very lengthy document. In the interest of trying to save the trees, I only have a couple of copies. There are a limited number of pages in the document that I wanted to show the witness, but I have the entire document.
Is it something that the parties would have received in discovery or have had access to?
The parties to 9667 have seen it. The parties to this case would not necessarily have received it, no.
Okay, so I think one full copy needs to go to Potomac Edison, one to me, and I think the other parties, unless you object, can have the relevant pages.
Fair enough. And one to the witness.
Yes.
22, right?
Yoicks.
This is the response to a data request, Maryland Sun 1-4 in case 9667, and I'd like it marked as OPC Cross Exhibit 22.
OPC 22 is marked. Mr. Nalm, are you getting a cold breeze?
I'm fine. I can feel it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's one of us.
I'm taking a cool breeze.
This is 21.
Mr. Valdez, do you see that this is a request for line item disclosures of all payments, PE, included in FERC accounts 911, 921, 923, 930.1, and 930.2 for the years from 2012 to 2021? See that?
I do.
You see it was provided by Ms. Nancy Kramer and Ms. Courtney Ansell. Do you see that?
I do.
Are you familiar with those folks?
I'm familiar with the name Nancy Kramer, and I know Courtney Ansel.
Do those individuals, do either of them report to you?
No, Courtney is in the accounting department. I'm not sure what department Nancy Kramer is, and I'm in the rates department.
Look at the attachment. Have you ever seen lists like this of payments made to third parties for outside services? You familiar with lists of this kind?
No, I'm not.
You're not. me show you another document and see if that helps.
Your Honor, was this marked as 22?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Your Honor, apparently we're having difficulty hearing Mr. Strauss on YouTube. I don't know, his mic is...
Mr. Strauss, would it be possible to put your mic on top of the notebook that's, yes, thank you. It's probably because you're facing that way.
I'll speak up.
Thanks. Thank you.
This is a response to OPC 5.10. It is labeled confidential. We have talked with Mr. Trout, and I believe we can discuss it on the public record. It is a response in case number 9667, and I'd ask that it be marked as OPC 23.
Mr. Trout, it can be OPC 23, not 23C.
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay, OPC 23 is marked.
You see, this is a response provided by Mr. Richards, who we spoke about a little while ago.
Yes.
In the response to Exhibit OPC 23, you see that the company is asked about the payments to Sustainability Funding Alliance for 2014 and 2015. And the statement's made that it doesn't appear in the listing of payments that I showed you in Exhibit 22, that thick document you had a look at. Do you see that?
I see that.
And you see the statement that the Sustainability Funding Alliance payments are included in a category called non-third-party vendor activity. Do you see that? That's in the response to 510.
I see that.
Is that a term with which you're familiar, non-third-party vendor activity?
It is not.
It's not. Yeah. Do you have any reason to question the accuracy of the attachment to Exhibit OPC 22 that was prepared by Ms. Kramer and Ms. Ansel?
I wouldn't be able to form an opinion on it one way or the other.
And how about the response to OPC 510, Exhibit 23? I think you said you know Mr. Richards. Would you have any reason to doubt the validity of that response?
I don't know if I understand what the response is saying, but I have no way to validate it or not validate it.
You see in the response, it says, based on the cost collectors charged at First Energy Service Company and the ultimate settlement to Potomac Edison for these payments, being the Sustainability Funding Alliance payments, the query used to prepare Exhibit 22 and the attachment was not able to associate these costs to the originating vendor name. You see that?
I do.
Can you tell me how you were able, using the company records, to find the sustainability costs, for example, that are on the attachment to Exhibit OPC 21? That's the spreadsheet you prepared.
I don't do the query. Accounting does the query.
What do they give you after they do the query? What data do you see?
It's the same results. The company, Potomac Edison, the charges when they occur, capital or O&M, the amounts, items of that nature.
So someone else got the data that's on the attachment to Exhibit 21, that spreadsheet? Someone else did that for you?
The source data.
Got you the source data?
The source data.
Someone who works for you?
No.
Who was it then?
Accounting.
Accounting. Anybody in particular?
I think this all in this 21 is OPC 3.8. Is that right?
That's correct. Sorry, I should have made that clear.
Yeah, this all relates to information that was provided to me by the Controller's Department, which is accounting.
Okay.
Mr. Valdez, on your spreadsheet that you prepared in response to OPC 3.08, Attachment A, which is marked as OPC Exhibit 21, you're not saying that the figures in the first two columns at the bottom, vendors A through D, sustainability, also in the third column, generation now, that all of those figures were given to you by accounting. You're saying the raw data underlying those figures was given to you by accounting, and that you applied rate making to what was given to you by accounting. Is that right?
That's exactly correct. The spreadsheet is the rate making model output.
Not the spreadsheet in its entirety, but specifically the line items under the first three. I guess it's the vendors A through D column, the sustainability column, and the generation now and HWO. For instance, on that first line, March 23rd through 31, 2019, the figure 686.57. You're not saying that accounting gave you that figure. What you're saying is accounting gave you raw data, and you made that figure based on your rate-making duties.
That's exactly correct.
Okay, thank you.
Give me a minute, Your Honor.
Sure. While you're doing that, I apologize, Mr. Strauss, and to the counsel for Potomac Edison. I know I probably shouldn't jump in and ask questions mid-witness and mid-cross-examination, but sometimes when you take a break or I feel like it's going to be a little quicker to get it done while we're still on the subject, I'll do that, so I apologize.
No need, Your Honor.
I have two documents to show you, Mr. Valdez. The first one is OPC's, the company's response to OPC 1.4 in case 9667. I'd ask that be marked as OPC Cross Exhibit 24.
You said 9667 OPC 1.4?
Correct.
Okay, and that's OPC Exhibit 24 in this matter? Yeah, it's marked, thank you.
And then the second one is a response to OPC data request 3.5. And that is in case 9667, and that is marked as, I'd ask that be marked as Exhibit OPC Cross 25.
25 is marked. Mr. Strauss,
I will
will that
speak
one
up.
reach to like the other side of you? There, try that.
Would you take a moment to have a look at these, sir? 24 and 25. You are a co-sponsor of 24 and the sponsor of 25. You have also, if you could bring in front of you, Exhibit OPC 21. That's the spreadsheet you and the judge were just talking about. Recall when I asked you earlier about vendors A through D, and you told me you didn't recall who they were, or you weren't sure who they were. Transcript will show however you answered. Do you remember that discussion?
Yes.
So do you see your response here in OPC 25 that you say the references to Tony George payments, Randazzo payments, and data request number 31030 in OPC .104 attachment A correspond to the annual amounts for vendors A to D, sustainability, and generation now and HWO. You see that?
I do.
You mentioned also that we should see the response to OPC 3.08, which is Exhibit 21, is it not?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. You mentioned also in this data response that we, OPC, should see the response to OPC 3.08, which is Exhibit OPC 21, correct?
Yes.
All right. So to go back to OPC Exhibit 21 for a moment, when we say vendors A to D, you're talking about Tony George payments, Randazzo payments, and data request number 31030. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that again, just so I can follow that?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Let me get it right this time. When putting together Exhibit 25 and Exhibit 21, your answer to 25 and the spreadsheet on 21, if we're looking at vendors A through D, that's a reference to Tony George payments. Is that correct? That's putting together your two responses. I haven't asked you about 24 yet. We'll get there. Although is 24 relevant? Happy to have you tell me.
I think I need 24 to make the connection.
Very well.
So it appears as though on the, I guess this is a journal voucher. This is on Exhibit 24.
It's the attachment to 24.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Correct?
Attachment 24. There is an amount of $49,585.80. And that is under the name Tony George Payments.
Right.
And that amount is within 1 penny of attachment 21 on the bottom, very bottom, in the second column that says total through December of 2020. Under vendors A through D, it's $49,585.79. So it's within 1 penny.
And the Randazzo payments on the attachment to Exhibit 24, those total $2,205.32, and that's the exact item at the bottom of the sustainability column, correct?
That's correct.
And the Generation Now and HWA column at the bottom totals 15,000. This is on Exhibit 21, 15,147.12, and that corresponds to almost to with the difference of 1 penny. What is on OPC 104 Attachment A, data request number 31030. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you know what data request number 31030 is?
I don't.
All right, let's go back now to 25. Just want to nail this down. So then, am I correct then that vendors A through D, based on the discussion we just had, it refers to the Tony George payments, and sustainability refers to the Randazzo payments? Do I have that right?
Yes.
Thank you. And Generation Now and HWO refer to the data request number 31030. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Valdez. I have nothing further.
Thank you.
Staff?
Should I move the
Oh,
admission of
sorry.
exhibits?
Yes.
Move the admission of exhibits OPC 20 through 25. Oh, wait, one moment. Hang on for a moment. I may have misspoke, Your Honor. I may have one more to ask him
Sure.
before we close up. Actually, I have one more exhibit.
Sure.
It's the response to data request OPC 1803 in this case. Mr. Valdez is the sponsor, and I'd ask that you mark this OPC 26.
OPC 26 is marked. Thank you.
Mr. Valdez, do you see you're the sponsor of this response?
I do.
And a simple question, if I asked you the question here today, would your answer be the same?
Yes.
All right, very well, thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor. And I move the admission of OPC 20 through 25 and 26.
OPC 20 through 26 are admitted.
Thank you.
Staff?
Staff has no questions.
Walmart?
No questions, Your Honor.
Potomac Edison?
I have no redirect, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Valdez, thanks for your appearance today. You can be released.
Thank you.
It's
That's-
7 o'clock and we're behind schedule. Go ahead, you were saying.
I was just going to state the obvious, which is that was the last company witness.
So the company rests.
The company rests its direct case, yes.
We're terribly behind schedule. Your witnesses are next. I don't know what their travel arrangements are.
Mr. Garrett is present, and he currently has a flight, I believe, scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Of course, he understands that he could have testified tomorrow, but he is willing to testify now if everyone is. I believe the time estimate originally for Mr. Garrett was 30 minutes of cross by Potomac Edison. And then we have Mr. Thomas nearby if needed. But
Potomac Edison, unless you strenuously object, I think we'll handle the one witness from OPC and then we'll start up again in the morning.
Your Honor, we will, of course, do that. I would suggest, given that what we have for witnesses tomorrow are, if we did Mr. Garrett tomorrow, as opposed to today, we would have Garrett, Thomas, and Hunt, 3 witnesses from OPC, and then McAuliffe, Justy, Lee, and Lowe from staff. That's a total of 7 witnesses. I can assure you that our crosses are going to be shorter than some of the other crosses which have occurred in this case, and I believe we could get through all 7 of those witnesses tomorrow. That said, If you want to try to do Garrett tonight, I'm thinking we'd be done in, well, it depends on whether anybody else has cross. We would be done around 7:30 to 7:45.
Let's handle Mr. Garrett tonight. Mr. Garrett, you can come to the witness box.
James.
Ms. Zeichner, Mr. Trout, can we plow through, or do you need 5 minutes?
Off the record, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Uh,
So like 2 minutes? Sounds good.
I'm sorry.
Are you done? Thank you. No. We can do 5 minutes, and I can take you down to the next floor. Honestly, if you want to take the elevator down to the 16th floor, it's the same layout, and it will be open. Yeah, and I'll wait. It's going to be 5 minutes.
Okay, and so we're still off the record?
Yes.
My,
We're on YouTube, but we're off the record.
my time estimate did not include any.
I understand. I understand. When,
Okay. No, it's up. Yeah, no, I got it off, but it'll get brighter when I, just so, thank you.
When we come back on, Gary, we're at 27.
Oh, okay.
My name's Joe. How are you? Good, David Garrett. David, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
off the record.
So, you are not the first person who's suggested to me that you need some time after your kid is born before you have to testify. And I just remember sitting for my first exam, first semester of first year law school.
Oh,
Within 24 hours of my first child being born, after 32 hours of labor in the hospital.
and what was your grade?
Bingo, good point.
So my record for hearings was one time before Chairman Nazarian. We were here until just before 9 o'clock on a hearing, on a rate case hearing. And 9 p.m. And when we all left, our cars were all locked in. And we couldn't get them out. We didn't expect to go that long. Yes. Yes, I wasn't on that case, but it was close to midnight. Mm-hmm. And the day afterwards, they arranged for her to park in the building.
Did they?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We're just waiting on the court reporter. This, you all have the nice new chairs. This chair is like this far from the ground because it has to be because of the how tall the bench is. So it's like you're at a kid's table in Thanksgiving. Aren't they great? We got those right after COVID when we started opening up the hearing rooms again. Mm-hmm.
So when my children were small, that's when I did my tour of duty as an assistant district DA, and I actually brought my small kids to court to see Daddy perform on one or two occasions. So I have not even thought about repeating that with my grandchildren and bringing them to a rate proceeding.
Well, you're welcome to call me. You can bring your grandkids here. We can turn on all the mics and they can pretend to. That's what my kids like to do. They like to come to work with me and sit in the hearing room while I'm in my office and pretend like they're handling a case.
So
It's always atrocious.
So my son's advocate for disability rights, he's a lobbyist, and my daughter's a doctor. I was blessed to not have either of them follow me into legal profession, and I'm working on the same with my grandchildren. Do not want them to do this really.
Do you know about Flat Stanley? When I was a prosecutor, they don't call them DAs in Virginia, we brought Flat Stanley to court. It's a big flat person that you can mail. It's a kid's book. We brought him to court. We put him in the lockup. He was great. Kids loved it. And then they recorded it and took pictures and presented it to their class. It was fun. Mr. Nam, do you want to switch to a different chair? Okay. Okay, we can go back on the record. All right, OPC, you can go ahead and call your witness.
Thank you.
Jacob Auslander, O-U-S-L-A-N-D-E-R.
Your Honor, I'd like to call David J. Garrett to the stand.
Mr. Garrett, can you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give tonight will be the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Something like that. Can you state your first and last name and spell it for the court reporter?
My name is David Garrett, Garrett.
Your witness.
Mr. Garrett, would you please, this is Gary L. Alexander on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. Would you please state the name of your business?
I'm the managing member of Resolve Utility Consulting.
And Mr. Garrett, do you have before you a public version, well, not public, do you have before you a document entitled Direct Testimony of David J. Garrett, dated June 9, 2023, filed in this case, which includes 118 pages of narrative testimony and appendices A through E, curriculum vitae, a list of your participation in utility regulatory proceedings, and 30 exhibits.
I do.
And, Your Honor, I'd like to have Mr. Garrett's pre-filed direct testimony marked for identification as OPC Exhibit 27.
OPC 27 is marked.
And Mr. Garrett, do you also have before you a document entitled Surrebuttal Testimony of David J. Garrett, dated July 14, 2023, filed in this case, which comprises 22 pages of narrative testimony?
You know, I don't believe I do, actually, unless it's,
You don't have your surrebuttal?
I don't have a copy of my surrebuttal.
Okay. Oh, well, all right. This is
I
clean.
thought it was in one of these.
This is clean.
Notebooks,
There's no
maybe.
tabs on it.
I think those are our binders, Your
Right,
Honor. I
yeah.
apologize
No,
for
this
not
is
removing them.
No, that's wrong.
Yes.
Okay, well, that was a new one on me. Let's try it again.
It looks like I have my copy of my surrebuttal now.
Okay, so let me repeat the question again. Mr. Garrett, do you have before you a document entitled Surrebuttal Testimony of David J. Garrett, dated July 14, 2023, filed in this case, which comprises 22 pages?
I do.
And before I go further, I want to note something for the record. That even though the title page is correctly marked as surrebuttal testimony, and the table of contents is correctly noted as surrebuttal testimony, and the narrative testimony is surrebuttal testimony. On the page on page 2, it says, I wonder if it's this. Okay. Try that again. On page 2, it's mislabeled direct testimony of David J. Garrett, which it should be surrebuttal testimony of David J. Garrett. And also in the upper right, where it says OPC exhibit blank parenthesis DJG, close parenthesis, right under that it says David J. Garrett direct testimony. And that's what will be on the header in every one. And the word direct should be changed to surrebuttal testimony.
I do.
Okay. And I'd also, Mr. Garrett, in your respective direct and surrebuttal testimonies, do you discuss and opine on the subjects of the company's cost of capital as well as the company's depreciation?
Yes.
Okay. And I'd like to have the pre-filed version of Mr. Garrett's surrebuttal testimony marked for ID as OPC Exhibit 28.
28 is marked.
Thank you. Mr. Garrett, were all of these documents before you prepared by you or under your supervision and direction?
Yes.
And do you have any corrections or deletions to make to your testimony at this time other than the ones we just did?
No.
And if you were asked the same questions today under oath, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
And for these reasons, do you adopt these direct and surrebuttal testimonies respectively as your sworn testimony in this matter?
I do.
Your Honor, I move that OPC exhibit numbers 27 and 28 be admitted into evidence.
27 and 28 are admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And then, Your Honor, the witness is now available for cross-examination.
Staff, do you have any cross for this witness?
No, we do not.
Walmart,
No, Your Honor.
Potomac Edison.
We do, Your Honor. We do have cross-examination. It will be conducted by Mr. Meehan.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Garrett.
Good evening.
May I direct your attention to your surrebuttal testimony? Page 16, lines 7 and 8.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. In this section of your surrebuttal testimony, you state in part, my service life analysis involves looking at past retirement rates in order to project future retirement rates. Do you agree that future retirement rates are affected by factors other than past retirement rates?
Yes.
Can future retirement rates be affected by changes in state laws?
Yes.
Can future retirement rates be affected by changes to the electric load?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, do you have in front of you a copy of the direct testimony of John Spanos?
I believe I do. Yes, I have it.
Okay. Specifically, would you go to the attachment labeled JJS-2A, beginning on page 155 of 206?
This was direct.
Pardon me, Your Honor?
This was Spanos' direct.
Yes, Your Honor. It's an exhibit attached to his direct testimony.
Your Honor, can I just ask for a pause for a second while I get Mr. Spanos' testimonies?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. And could I ask again opposing counsel to, the company counsel, to tell me which page that he has just directed?
Yes, exhibit JJS-2A, page 155 of 206.
I'm there.
If you can give me one more second, I'm flipping as fast as I can. All right, thank you. Did you say 156?
155. Page 155
okay.
of 206.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Okay, I'm there. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Garrett, the title of this page of the referred exhibit is the Potomac Edison Company, account 365.00, overhead conductors and devices. Calculated remaining life depreciation accrual related to original cost as of June 30th, 2022. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, looking at this page of the referred exhibit, can you tell me what is the oldest aged asset according to the company's plant records?
1945.
And Mr. Garrett, what percent of the account has survived to reach age 77?
Percentage of the account has survived to reach age 77.
Mr. Garrett, in response to my prior question, you had said that the oldest age asset is 1945. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, can Mr. Garrett find what he was looking for so he can answer the question?
I think the next question is necessary. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Garrett, that's approximately 77 years. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And what I had asked you was what percent of the account has survived to reach age 77? Or perhaps another way to say it is how many dollars installed in 1945 are still in service?
That's what I wanted to check the observed life table to see, to confirm that. But here, for 1945, it's 644,479.
And looking at that from a percentage standpoint, can you tell me what percent of the account has survived?
Oh, not without a calculator, but it's a small percentage.
Approximately 1% or less?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Garrett, if you would, please refer to page 19 of Mr. Spanos' rebuttal testimony.
Is that in this book?
OPC is, did you provide the witness with Mr. Spanos' rebuttal in that same book?
Your Honor,
Oh,
maybe
here, I see it.
Yeah.
It was kind of hiding. Okay, I have that.
Okay. And page 19, figure 3.
Okay.
In figure 3, Mr. Garrett, is a comparison of company staff and OPC proposed survivor curves for account 365.00 overhead conductors and devices. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Based on your survivor curve in figure 3, your survivor curve estimate of 72-R0.5, approximately what percent of plant is projected to survive until 77 years of age?
Oh, approximately 50%.
And does that seem likely to you given the fact that less than 1% of the company's current system has reached 77 years of age?
I believe it's not. I believe it's a reasonable estimate given the retirement pattern that we've observed in the account thus far.
Sticking with figure 3 on page 19 of Mr. Spanos' rebuttal testimony. Mr. Garrett, what percentage of assets does your 72-R0.5 project will still be in service at 120 years of age?
About 10%.
And do you think an electric distribution system that has over 10% of its overhead conductor aged 120 years or older would be safe and reliable?
I don't have a reason to say it wouldn't be safe and reliable. Another thing to keep in mind is that we are looking at the average of all the assets in the account. And so it's not suggesting that any particular one asset would last that long, but those dollars could be comprised a number of different asset classes in the account. But none of this is suggesting that has to do with the safety and reliability or saying that it wouldn't be safe and reliable.
Mr. Garrett, going back to your SIR rebuttal testimony. Page 20.
Okay.
Okay, lines 7 through 13. In this section of your SIR rebuttal testimony, you state, however, by relying primarily on statistical analysis of the most relevant portions of the OLT curve, but also an appropriate amount of informed judgment based on all the information presented in the depreciation study and a working knowledge of service lives typically observed among the industry, my selection of the R2-73 Iowa curve is well-informed, reasonable, and is not at odds with the approach outlined in the NARUC manual. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, from reading this quote, can one reasonably infer that you believe a 73-year average service life is a, quote, typically observed average service life among the industry?
I think it's within a range, appropriate range.
Mr. Garrett, have you reviewed or considered other First Energy entity estimates that have similar management plans in relation to your survivor curve estimate?
Not as part of my scope of review in this case.
Mr. Garrett, did you rely on the data provided by Mr. Spanos as the attachment to staff data request 12-26 in relation to your survivor curve estimate?
I can't specifically recall. Is that
Can
him providing?
I ask that council provide that DR request, DR response?
Oh.
I don't believe it's been entered into the record, Your Honor, no. Yes, Your Honor, we do. We can move to omit it when we finish cross, Your Honor.
Can I get one? Thank you.
I do. Sorry.
Mr. Garrett, do you have a copy of the data provided by Mr. Spanos as the attachment to staff data request 12-26 in front of you?
I do.
Are you familiar with the attachment?
I am.
And do you remember my initial question, or should I read it back to you?
Your initial question was asking if a 73-year average life is typically observed in the industry.
As it relates to the attachment to staff data request 1226, did you rely on that data in relation to your survivor curve estimate?
Not specifically this data, although I'm familiar with this and I did review it as well. And it's also something that generally I ask for in just about every case. When Gannett Fleming or John Spanos, one of his colleagues, is a witness, and they'll provide sometimes these industry statistics. And my understanding of this data are Iowa curves that Gannett Fleming has recommended in other cases, some of which may have been adopted, others maybe not. And we don't know which companies go with which curves, but that's my understanding of what this data is. And I did review it.
You did review it, but you didn't consider it. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, that mischaracterizes what Mr. Garrett just said.
I think the best way to say it is I do consider it. I may not have given it as much weight, perhaps as Mr. Spanos, but I think I do consider it. I primarily do like to rely on the historical retirement data of the utility being studied, more so than industry statistics, unless the data for the utility is just not very good or not adequate, or we're not getting any reasonable good survivor curve indications. Then that amount of that consideration weight that I give would be more so perhaps on the statistics, but not just Gannett-Fleming statistics, but other cases I've been involved in as well in my recommendations.
Mr. Garrett, do you believe this database attachment A to Discovery Request 12 or Data Request 12-26 to be a reasonable data set to consider when describing lives across the industry?
I wouldn't say it's unreasonable, but I have to give it the appropriate amount of consideration and realizing that it is the Iowa curves proposed by Gannett-Fleming, who testifies for utility companies, and that we don't know which companies go with which curves, so there's really no way to verify it. I'm not suggesting it's not accurate, but it's really just a bunch of Iowa curves associated. You see there, company number 1, 2, 3. I do think it can have some value. I don't want to overvalue it in my analysis.
Mr. Garrett, what data did you use to observe the typical lives within the industry in relation to your survivor curve estimate?
I'm relying on my own experience in cases I've been involved with in the past, as well as, again, I would say to a lesser extent, and it depends on the account we're talking about, but for the accounts in this case, to a lesser extent, a data set like this from Gannett-Fleming.
Mr. Garrett, in this case, part of your testimony includes testimony around net salvage. Is that correct?
Yes.
And just to confirm, Mr. Garrett, you represent the Maryland Office of People's Counsel in this case, correct?
I do.
And in the state of Maryland in the past 5 to 10 years or so, has the Office of People's Counsel proposed using an account level approach similar to what you're proposing in this case to calculate depreciation rates using the Maryland present value method?
Yes, they have. Was your question referring to since the present value method started?
That's about
since
right.
its inception? Yes, the People's Counsel has recommended net salvage rates calculated under the present value method, conducted on an account level basis as I've proposed in this case, and other OPC witnesses have recommended it under a vintage level approach, which is more similar to the company's approach in this case.
And do you happen to know which other cases aside from this case?
Without it being in front of me, I know the one that originally Charles King represented the OPC. I think this is when it first started, actually. It may have been his initial recommendation. I believe he recommended it on an account level approach because when I was retained, for the first case in which I was retained, I remember looking back at his work papers and then modeling my net salvage method after his. Since Maryland has this unique approach, I modeled my approach after his. So as far as the case numbers go, I can't recall those as I sit here. But it's been at least those two other ones, and now I suppose this case as well. But.
Okay. Similar question, Mr. Garrett. In Maryland, same time period, has OPC proposed a vintage level approach similar to what the company is proposing in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And similar question, do you know which other cases?
Not the case numbers, but I believe when the staff witness in this case, James Guerin, has testified for OPC in prior cases that he has proposed we're calling it the vintage level approach.
Okay. Mr. Garrett, if the intent of the present value method is to discount the dollars based on when assets went into service, why would you then take an average remaining life to determine the total value?
I believe that's the way that at least under the account level approach, my understanding of it is the way it's been conducted. And again, this is a unique method. So I believe that's the original intent, perhaps, which again, I wasn't involved in the original case, was to model it somewhat after ARO accounting. And I guess I don't know if we're still referring to it as that. It's come a long way since then, perhaps, but I think originally that was the concept of employing the present value method. So I think that's where it has its roots from the ARO accounting approach, which I believe does consider remaining life, although I'm not entirely sure about that as I sit here.
Okay. Mr. Garrett, earlier this year, sometime in February of 2023, did the Office of People's Counsel file a petition for near-term priority actions and comprehensive long-term planning for the state of Maryland's gas companies?
I'm vaguely familiar with that, but not of the timing. But subject to check. Wouldn't surprise me if they filed that in February.
Okay. Mr. Garrett, we're going to hand you a copy of the referred petition as a reference, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. I don't intend on marking this petition. Yes. Would you like? Okay. Your Honor, Potomac Edison would like to move to admit, data request 12-26, including attachment A, into the record as Exhibit 38.
Is that the one that, no objection, Your Honor.
38 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Garrett, do you have a copy of the petition of OPC from earlier this year? It's dated February 9th of 2023 in front of you?
I do.
Okay. Would you kindly refer to page 1 of the petition?
Okay.
About halfway down the page there.
Okay.
The sentence starting and reads as follows. The gas companies escalating capital spending on infrastructure. Capital spending on infrastructure are misaligned with technological and economic trends towards the replacement of fossil gas with electricity. Do you see that part of the paragraph, sir?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, do you believe there's a technological and or economic trend toward the replacement of fossil gas with electricity?
I believe there is a trend for that.
Okay. And in your opinion, Mr. Garrett, how will that trend or how will that affect the electric load in the state of Maryland?
I believe it could potentially increase the load. No one knows anything for sure. These are all projections, but it could.
All right, same page, Mr. Garrett, a little further down. Same sentence, actually, before it closes out. OPC refers to evidence-backed policy to convert buildings to electricity to meet the challenge of climate change. Do you see that part of the sentence?
Is the same page?
Yes, and it's actually the last part of the same sentence that we read earlier.
Oh, okay. I see that.
Okay.
I do, yeah.
Okay.
I see.
Would converting buildings from gas-powered to electric-powered lead to an increase or a decrease in electricity demand?
Your Honor, objection, lack of foundation.
Overruled.
I think just based on that hypothetical you're describing, it would increase the demand.
Mr. Garrett, would you please turn to page 6 of the petition?
Okay.
Referring to the first sentence at the top of the page. Put simply, the gas company's focus on rapid investment in fossil fuel infrastructure fails to account for the fact that customers have begun to switch from fossil gas to electricity, a trend that will accelerate as every level of government acts to achieve its climate goals. Did I read that right?
You did.
Mr. Garrett, do you agree that customers have begun to switch from gas to electric and that the trend will accelerate in the future?
Your Honor, I'm going to object again, lack of foundation.
I'm going to allow it.
I don't have data in front of me supporting this. It wouldn't surprise me to see that data. As far as any projections of the future, there's no way to know that. But if you're hypothetically describing this occurring and then the trend continuing, then yes, I generally agree to that.
And if that trend does continue, Mr. Garrett, how will that affect the electric load in Maryland?
I would think it could have an increasing effect on load.
If that were the case and there was an increase on load or an increasing effect on load, would that lead to increased wear and tear and or strain on the existing assets of electric companies?
I don't know if it would have an increase in wear relative to what is happening on average. I was here from Mr. Spanos' testimony about that, and I don't necessarily agree with him. He was very confident when he said it about this connection between increased electric load and shorter lives of asset, just kind of on a broad level. I haven't seen anything that would really make me as confident as he apparently is in that projection.
Mr. Garrett, as relates to your testimony in this case, you also testified on, offered testimony on return of equity, ROE. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, from approximately 2020 up to and including this case, you've been involved with and offered testimony in approximately 4 different rate cases in the state of Maryland. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
In 2020, case number 9651, that was Washington Gas Light Company. You offered testimony in that case. Is that correct?
That sounds right, yeah.
In 2021, case number 9664, for Columbia Gas of Maryland Incorporated, you also offered testimony in that case?
Yes.
In 2021, case number 9670, for Delmarva Power and Light Company, you also offered testimony in that case. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you're also offering testimony in the current case, case number 9695 for Potomac Edison. Is that correct?
That's right.
Mr. Garrett, in each of those cases, those 4 separate cases for 4 different utilities, did you offer a recommended ROE?
If I testified on the ROE issue in each one of those cases, sometimes I'm just working on depreciation. But then, yes, I believe in my testimony I would have recommended an authorized ROE based on my analysis.
Mr. Garrett, in each of these 4 cases, am I right that you recommended a 9.0% ROE for each of the 4 different utilities?
I don't specifically recall. You're saying 9% for each one?
Each of the cases, yes.
It wouldn't surprise me if that were the case.
Okay, and as we sit here today, do you have a specific recollection of the recommendations you made in those cases as it relates to ROE?
Not the specific ROEs for each case, but those sound right.
Mr. Garrett, we just talked about 4 rate cases in Maryland from 2020 through the current rate case that brings us here today. I'm going to bring your attention to a few other matters where you offered testimony. Mr. Garrett, what you've just been handed, and I'll give you some time to look through it, is copies of Public Service Commission orders from the states of Arkansas, Florida, and Maryland. No, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I would note that staff does not have a copy. I understand there were not enough. They did not bring enough copies to hand them to everybody.
We only have one.
In that case, I would ask that you try to cover reading the significant portions that you need to refer to into the record so that staff is able to hear that. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
In your question, don't just refer to a page. Also, read the relative portion or have the witness read the relative portion.
Understood. Will do. Thank you, Your Honor.
I've got it.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Garrett, starting with tab A.
Tab A.
Yeah.
The Arkansas Public Service Commission.
Um,
Not everybody has a tab. Apologies.
Oh, okay. Are we talking about docket number 21-0070-U, order number 14, in the matter of the application of Southwestern Electric Power Company for approval of a general change in rates and tariffs? Is this what we're talking about?
Thank you, counsel. Yes, it is. We
Okay.
hadn't gotten that far, but yes, you've correctly identified the document.
Mr. Alexander, I think you have 3 binder clipped portions. One binder clip corresponds to
I
tab
don't-
A.
Do we have binders?
No, these are binders. So I think this
Oh, you're talking about binder clips.
Yes.
I don't have binders, though.
Yes. So the binder clip that has Arkansas Public Service Commission on the first page is tab A.
Where's the tab A?
You don't have a tab.
Oh, if I had a binder, this would be tab A, but when
Yes.
he says it, I don't know, so that's why I wanted to.
So you might
identify.
want to write tab A on the top of that
Sure.
binder clip.
Absolutely.
And you'll have another binder clip package that
Yep.
refers to the Florida Public Service Commission, and you'll have one for Maryland.
Okay, so
So
the
Florida is tab B,
Okay,
and Maryland is tab C.
got it. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the
Go ahead.
courtesy.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good. Mr. Garrett, referring to tab A, what we will call the Arkansas Public Service Commission order, do you remember offering testimony before the Arkansas Public Service Commission in this, in the Southwestern Electric Power Company rate case?
I do.
And in that rate case, Mr. Garrett, were you representing the Western Arkansas large energy consumers?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, would you please turn to page 16 of 136?
Okay.
Mr. Garrett, would you please read the highlighted sentence on page 16 of 136?
The Commission notes that Wayleck's range by its own admission could increase the company's risk profile, hindering the company's access to capital, and would arguably be at odds with the Hope Court's end result.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Would you now turn to page 17 of 136? And would you kindly read the highlighted portion there, please?
Based on the evidence provided, the Commission finds that a fair and reasonable ROE is 9.5%. The Commission finds that a 9.5% ROE is reasonable to ensure that SWEPCO is given the opportunity to earn a fair and reasonable rate of return, commensurate with the risk attendant to its business, and to position the company to continue to attract the capital necessary to provide reliable service.
For the record, in that text, SWEPCO is SWEPCO, and in the previous text that was read by the witness, WALEC is WALEC. Go ahead.
And Mr. Garrett, just to confirm, WALEC was your client in that matter. Is that correct?
That's right.
And referring to page 16, the paragraph above the highlighted portion, is your recommended ROE for WALEC 7.00% to 7.50%?
No, I don't think that's right. That sounds to me, let me see, that sounds to me more like a cost of equity recommendation. I don't think I would have recommended that for the authorized return on equity in that case. So the answer to your question, I believe, is no. But I don't have a reason to doubt that that is my cost of equity estimation models. So the full paragraph says, the Commission observes that 4 parties perform cost of equity estimation models and develop recommended ROE ranges. And they're citing to some ranges for AG, staff, and SWEPCO that do look like awarded ROE ranges based on the numbers. Then when they get to WALEC, that looks like they're citing my cost of equity range, which is going to be different than, especially during this, 2021, it's going to be more different than the authorized ROE range. So I can't specifically recall in that case what my recommended ROE was. And really the next paragraph that's highlighted also shows that they probably don't have a full understanding of that distinction, because nowhere in my testimony would I have admitted by its own admission that my ROE, my authorized ROE, would increase the risk profile and hinder the company's access to capital and all that nonsense. So,
Mr. Garrett, thank you. Turning to tab C in the binder that's in front of you. And tab C is the Maryland Public Service Commission. In the matter of the application of Columbia Gas of Maryland, Inc. for authority to increase rates and charges. Before the Public Service Commission of Maryland, case number 9664, issued October 29, 2021. Proposed order of Public Utility Law Judge. Did I read that correctly?
yes.
Mr. Garrett, you've offered testimony here before the Public Service Commission of Maryland in the Columbia Gas of Maryland, Inc. rate case, case number 9664, on behalf of the People's Council, the Office of People's Counsel, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, can you please turn to page 21?
Okay.
Mr. Garrett, could you read the highlighted sentence on page 21.
Yeah, it looks like we have a similar issue. Okay, it says Mr. Garrett utilized two financial models, the DCF and the CAP-M, and the same proxy group of gas utilities that Mr. Ray used to develop his recommended ROE of 7.2%. So I wouldn't have recommended an ROE of 7.2%. I guess it does go on in the next sentence to say he adjusted his final recommendation to 9.0%, but that still wouldn't make the end of the previous sentence quite accurate, where it says to develop his recommended ROE of 7.2%.
Mr. Garrett, would you please turn to page 29?
Okay.
And would you kindly read the highlighted final paragraph?
It says, considering all the relevant evidence presented on the cost of capital in this case, I find that a return on equity of 9.65% complies with the standard established by Hope and Bluefield, is comparable to returns investors expect to earn on investments of similar risk, is sufficient to ensure confidence in Columbia's financial integrity, and will enable investors to receive a fair return commensurate with risk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Garrett. And lastly, would you kindly turn to tab B?
Okay.
Before the Florida Public Service Commission, NRA application for increase in water and wastewater rates in Charlotte, Highlands, Lake Lee, Marion, Orange, Pasco, Pinellas, Polk, and Seminole counties by Utilities, Inc. of Florida. Docket number 202001399-WS. Order number PSC-2021-0206-F0F-WS. Issued June 4, 2021.
Your Honor, I believe in the second line, I think that's FOF, not F0F.
Okay, thank you.
And the document number is 04546-2021. Did I read that right, Mr. Garrett?
Yes.
Mr. Garrett, in this matter, did you offer testimony on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Garrett, can you turn to page 86, please?
Okay.
Would you read the highlighted portion of the text for me?
OPC witness Garrett also used versions of the CAP-M and DCF model to calculate the cost of equity and determined the market cost of equity derived from his models indicated an ROE of 6%.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Would you kindly turn to page 95?
Okay.
And would you read the highlighted portion of that text as well?
It says, we agrees with UIF witness Diascendis that OPC witness Garrett's cost of equity model results of 6.00% has no correlation to and does not provide any empirical support for his recommended ROE of 9.50%. Further, a cost of equity of 6.00% is unreasonable. Therefore, witness Diascendis's traditional forms of the CAP-M and DCF models shall be given more weight than witness Garrett's CAP-M and DCF models. We place greater weight on the traditional forms of the CAPM and DCF models applied to a comparable utility proxy group. OPC witness Garrett's DCF model applied to a comparable utility proxy group. OPC witness Garrett's DCF model result was 6.00% using a growth rate of 3.9%. We agree with witness Diascendis that using an estimate for GDP of 3.9% as the growth rate in the DCF model for calculating the cost of equity using the utility proxy group is inappropriate because it is not based on any measure of growth in the utility industry.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. No more questions, Your Honor.
OPC?
Oh, is it time for redirect?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, court's indulgence, Your Honor. Um, I'd like you to go back to page 21 of tab C, which is the Maryland, the proposed order of the Public Utility Law Judge, issued October 29, 2021. Now,
Where did
oh, okay.
I do not know where I put that.
Did they give you, I thought they gave them the 3, did they?
I was just looking at it.
No, take your time.
Well, I cannot find that document. Well, I just thank you, but sorry about that. Wow, that's weird. Okay, I have it. I have it now.
If you look at the, what was yellow on page 21 under OPC,
Right.
if you look at the first sentence, you said that, I'm quoting here, regulated utilities are less risky than average stock. Is that what you, is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, we pretty much know that. I mean, that's more of a, I'd say more of a fact than an opinion because we can measure it through the beta term.
Okay, so now let's go to the yellow part. Did you recall if you recommended, in this case, a return on equity of 7.2%? Or was that part of your range of reasonableness?
Can you ask that one more time?
Sure. If you look at the yellowed
Mm-hmm.
sentence on page 21, it says that you utilize two financial models, the discounted cash flow model and the capital asset pricing model, and the same proxy groups as the company's cost of capital witness, Mr. Rea, used to develop his recommended ROE, return on equity, of 7.2%. Do you recall recommending 7.2% as your ROE in this case? Is
No.
this accurate?
No, it's not accurate, but it's due to kind of a technical nuance that I see quite a bit. So cost of equity is different than authorized ROE. From my experience in the industry, a lot of witnesses try to make those things the same. I think that leads to some inaccurate modeling results because it's going to make them almost always too high. So my approach has always been, you need to estimate the cost of equity, just be intellectually honest about what that is, as measured most appropriately through the CAPM, but also the DCF. Then the awarded ROE recommendation, the standard there is just reasonableness. So you can take into account all number of things. I think the primary focus should be cost of equity. So really what this, and again, it's just a misunderstanding, but it should say to develop his cost of equity estimate of 7.2%.
And is the cost of equity, is that also called the overall rate of return? Or something different?
It's different because the weighted average rate of return is going to consider capital structure and cost of debt in that calculation. So it is a little different.
Okay. And then it says in that same paragraph that you adjusted your final recommendation of 9%, presumably on the return on equity, to reflect a gradual change so as not to shock shareholders, which would increase the company's risk profile. Do you have any knowledge of the commission in the last few rate cases talk about, in the context of a return on equity, the concept of gradualism?
I am familiar that the commission's talked about it.
Okay, and so my question is, if you know, does the commission apply the concept of gradualism in terms of the company's existing ROE and the recommended ROEs of the various experts?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And on page 29, you were read in the yellow highlight that the proposed order of the Public Utilities Law Judge recommended a return on equity of 9.65%. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall, because you were here, you listened to the testimony of Mr. D'Ascendis? Or you read, let me ask you this, have you read his pre-file testimony?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall what Mr. D'Ascendis has recommended as the return on equity, the ROE for this case?
I don't have it right in front of me, but it's
Around.
subject to check 10.6,
Huh?
10.6, I
Okay.
believe.
Honor would indulge me for a second while I find this last question. I'd like you to turn to page 17.
Of the same document?
Yes. And could you go to page 17? And the sentence that starts, there's no line numbers on it because it's an order, in rebuttal. But before I do that, I want to ask you a question. In terms of Mr. Spanos' discussion in the present value method, did he propose a credit-adjusted risk-free rate in this case?
Mr. Spanos did, based on Mr. Diasindis' analysis.
Okay, and then do you know if Potomac Edison is a subsidiary of First Energy Corporation?
Yes.
All right. Can you read the sentence that starts in rebuttal?
I think I'm at the wrong spot. You wanted
Page 17
of his.
of this order.
So of the same binder.
This is yes, tab C.
Oh,
Tab C, page 17.
Tab C, page 17. It starts at the wrong spot. Okay, I'm there.
Can you read the sentence that starts in rebuttal?
Okay. It says, in rebuttal, witness Spanos contended that Columbia does not have a credit-adjusted risk-free rate due to being a subsidiary of its parent company, NiSource. Columbia was a subsidiary of NiSource at the time it entered into the settlement, which would indicate it did not have a credit-adjusted risk-free rate at that time either.
Okay, that goes beyond my redirect, unless if the judge wants him to read the whole paragraph. But I think that's going.
No, I'm fine.
Yeah. Oh, you want him to keep going?
No. You can ask your next question.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying not to go too far and stray too far. Well, Your Honor, indulgence again. I can't.
Brief indulgence.
Huh.
Brief
Yes,
indulgence.
of course. I think that's going to be. That's the end of my questions for tab C, Your Honor. And I'm going to go to tab A, which is the Southwestern Electric Power Company. um, docket number 21-070-U, order number 14, and you were asked that there are certain yellowed highlights that you were asked about. And the first ones were on page 12 of this order of the Arkansas Public Service Commission.
Objection, Your Honor. Actually, the referred portions of tab A were page 16 and page 17 only.
Well, Your Honor, the one I'm looking at has yellowed.
So does
So
my
you're
copy,
right,
counsel.
but it was highlighted, but he didn't ask about it.
Well, I think I would say that it's in the order, and I think that the applicant
So,
has
Mr. Alexander,
opened the door.
you just, I'm not saying the door's open, but you misspoke. He wasn't asked about that.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to ask you to turn to the bottom of 12, where it says overall, you estimated that the company's CAPM, capital asset pricing model, cost of equity is 7%.
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of cross.
No, I'm going to allow it. This is a document that you presented to the witness, and it's on the same subject matter. Go ahead.
Yes. Does the 7% result of your application of the CAPM in this case? Does that sound? How would you say that compares with, in this case, the results of your application of the CAPM method?
It's very consistent. Now, the numbers are going to be different because we're in different markets. That's what you should expect when you go to historically low interest rates and now coming out. Anyone who's being intellectually honest and running the CAPM is just going to get different results. Now, if you just want your CAPM to say 9.x%, because that's what you're going to recommend to the commission, you can do that. But it should be changing over time. And mine would continue to change. If we drop interest rates back down near zero, my CAPM is going to go back down to between 6 and 7%. So it's perfectly consistent in the way I've applied the model, but we're just talking about different periods of time.
Okay, thank you. And and the next sentence refers to the cost of equity. Before I get sentences, is this what you were just talking about when you talked about the confusion or the mislabeling? Is this the cost of equity that you were referring to?
Yeah, they're two very different numbers. I mean, the authorized return is just simply whatever the commission says it is. They said 50%, it's 50%. 0%, 0. I mean, it just that's what the authorized ROE is, or a recommended ROE, just what someone recommends. So, cost of equity is more of a pure concept in my mind. You run the models; they're market driven, and the models say what they say, particularly the CAPM. I mean,
right.
And so it is what we're talking about earlier, and here it's correct. I mean, I agree with the wording here. He concludes that the cost of equity indicated by the results of the DCF model and CAPM is 7.3%. That sounds right to me.
And now I think I'm going to move on. If Your Honor, did you just remind me that, and opposing counsel, that they asked about page 16 and 17 in
Yes,
this
sir.
order? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to the yellowed part on highlighted part on page 16 of this order. And they asked you, the commission notes that, do you say WALEX?
Yeah, we say WALEC.
All right, that's capital W-A, capital L-E-C, apostrophe S. Notes that WALEX range, by its own admission, could increase the company's risk profile, hindering the company's access to capital, and would arguably be at odds with the Hope Court's end result. Now, when they say the Hope Court, which court are they, which level of court are they referring to?
The U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay. And when they say Waylex range, they're talking about your testimony, correct? I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
accurate. I'm just saying that's what Waylex referring to. They were your client, so
Right.
Are they referring to your testimony?
Yeah, they're just mixing and matching because the previous paragraph they're talking about everybody's authorized ROE ranges, but then they insert my cost of equity range from the CAPM. Then they do say by Wayleg's own admission, so part of that is correct. Probably in that testimony, what I'm saying is my CAPM results are coming into 7 and 7.5. Maybe in a perfect world, that's what the authorized ROE would be. But let's not be too hard on Wall Street and have this gradual approach, basically. So, and yeah, it could increase the company's risk profile, I suppose, if you are having these dramatic changes in the authorized ROE. So what I said is true about the risk profile, but again, we're applying gradualism for the benefit of like BlackRock and Vanguard, just to keep in mind.
And so when they say Waylex, in this case, they said the cost of equity estimation models and develop recommended ROE ranges. I don't know if you directly recall, and you asked about this, do you recall if your range of reasonableness was 7% to 7.5% for the return on equity?
I mean, I'm pretty sure it would not have been, because my standard practice during that time when the CAPM is producing results like that we kind of all know, for better or worse, that commissions are not going to adopt as authorized ROE, even that's what, in my very strong opinion, cost of equity at that time were. Just like now it's more like 8.7%. So,
yeah, go ahead, please.
well, I think that if that answered the question, I would stop there.
Okay, now, this may be stating the obvious, but when the applicant gave you these orders of cases that you testified in, did they provide you with actually a copy of your testimony so you could verify what was going on?
No.
Okay. And let's go to the other yellowed one on page 17. They say, based on the evidence provided, the commission finds that a fair and reasonable ROE is 9.5%. And it's reasonable to ensure that SWEPCO is given the opportunity to earn a fair and reasonable rate of return commensurate with the risk attendant to its business and to position the company to continue to attract the capital necessary to provide reasonable service. I wanted to read the whole thing just so I'm not accepting something. Do you happen to recall what staff witness McAuliffe, who's testifying on the cost of capital in this case, do you happen to recall what his ultimate recommendation was for the ROE?
Objection, Your Honor. Goes beyond the scope of cross.
Sustained.
Okay. All right, so that's it for that tab. Now, I already asked about tab C. Is that right, Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay. I just have one more question about it is, Mr. Garrett, do you have any knowledge of whether the proposed order of the Public Utility Law Judge in the case number 9664, tab C, do you know if it was affirmed by the commission?
I don't know as I sit here.
Do you remember where the yellow pages are for this one? If you go to tab B, which is the case before the Florida Public Service Commission, and it's docket number 20200-139-WS, order number PSC-2021-0206-FOF-WS, and it's issued June 4, 2021. Do you have that in front of you?
I do.
Okay, now, if I recall correctly, if you turn to page 86,
I'm there.
and if you look at the highlighted, what was highlighted by the applicant, it said that you use versions of the CAPM and DCF model to calculate the cost of equity of these companies, and you determined that the market cost of equity derived from the models indicated an ROE of 6%. Again, did the applicant give you your testimony so you could check that?
No.
Okay. What are they talking about here? Is the market cost of equity the same thing as the ROE?
No, they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing, but I don't think that necessarily makes this sentence, not accurate. It's saying I use the DCF and the CAPM and determine the market cost of equity, which is part of the process. You're going to the market cost of equity is basically the CAPM of everything. If you just bought all equities, what's
So-
your required return on that portfolio?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Then you would adjust it, of course,
Okay.
downwards if you have a low
Right.
beta security. That you're
So now in that same paragraph, I'm going to direct your attention to the last sentence. And so my question is that did you ultimately recommend a 6% return on equity to this commission? And then I'm just directing your attention to the last sentence and see if that helps you answer the question.
This is indicating that my recommended authorized ROE in that case was 9.5%, which sounds it sounds right.
And this is a case, tab B, which involved water and wastewater rates, correct? I'm just looking at the front page.
I believe that's right.
So do you have tab B in front of you?
Yeah.
And do you have the first page of
That's-
the order?
No, that's right.
Okay. Is the risk profile, if you know, for water and wastewater rates for companies in the water and regulated utilities in the water and wastewater rate business, is that the same risk profiles as, say, a regulated electric utility such as Potomac Edison here?
I think they're similar, but I do think water and wastewater are a little less risky
Okay.
than electrics.
So I don't know, do you recall the applicant asking you or telling you that you recommended, and if I got this right, a 9% ROE in a number of cases? Did I hear that right?
I do recall that line of questioning.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, that's it. I
Okay.
recall him asking
So
about that.
if you recall, were the results of the application of the CAPM and the DCF models, were they mostly lower than 9%, if you recall, in these cases.
I'm almost sure in every case they would have been.
And the models that you use are the standard models, CAPM, DCF, by all, not only cost of capital experts, but investors. Is that right?
Yeah, and primarily for estimating cost of equity, it's going to be the CAPM and similar models in the CAPM family. The DCF is really a valuation model that we rearranged algebraically
Okay.
to solve for the discount rate.
So the lower numbers, if you recall, were they just the outputs of the inputs that you used to develop and these methodologies that you ended up applying?
Yes, I'm very consistent on how I apply the CAPM and DCF too, but if we're focusing on the CAPM, I'm very consistent in how I apply that. And so, right, the numbers just are what they are. I testify to that. And then what the fair awarded ROE is really a separate consideration. That's not the result of a model. That's what's fair under the circumstances.
Okay, and here, as the applicant just stated, do you recall them asking you what was your recommendation here, or that your recommendation was 9% ROE here?
It was 9% in this case, and I made that recommendation without referring to the previous cases, so that's interesting. But yeah, it was 9%.
And where was that in your range of reasonableness?
Well, now that,
if you know.
I did have a model that produced a 9% result in this case. It's a variation of the DCF model that considers analyst growth rates. I don't think this model indicates a market-based cost of equity for the reasons stated in my testimony. But regulators are used to seeing it and maybe like seeing it, I don't know, probably because it produces numbers they're more comfortable with seeing. And so in this case, that model produced a 9% ROE.
Okay.
It produced a mathematical result of 9%. I don't want to call that a cost of equity, and it's not an ROE, so
Okay.
it's just a mathematical output.
Your Honor, thank you for the courtesy, and that is the end of my redirect.
Mr. Garrett, I don't have any questions for you, so you're done. Thank you very much.
Oh, all right. Thanks again for
No
letting me
worries.
testify.
So it's 8:32 p.m. We're done for the day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're done for the day. We'll come back with the rest of OPC's case tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you for hanging in. We can go off the record.
Well, it's before 11 p.m. That's not bad.